Green Lantern, and more. Rival companies offered Catman, Bulletman, and scores of others. DC was the biggest comic book publisher, but there were more than a dozen competitors. One was Timely Comics, which would one day be known as Marvel.
DC comics were certainly better drawn and better written, but the Timely books seemed to embrace more mavericks and wilder ideas.
Case in point, Bill Everett, the creator of Timely's antisocial amphibian, The Submariner, and Carl Burgos, creator of crime-fighting android, The Human Torch, wanted to have their characters meet in a gigantic slugfest.
Fire and water, the battle of the century.
Timely's publisher, Martin Goodman, heard their idea on a Thursday and told Burgos and Everett to have it on his desk by Monday.
So Bill and Carl called up everyone that they knew who was involved in comics for a kind of jam session. Pages were being drawn before they were written. One guy who turned the bathroom into his office put a board across his legs and wrote in the bathtub. People who were yelling out their ideas, arguing about which would be the best way to get the job done. The neighbors went crazy, called the cops. The phone was ringing off the hook, but by Monday morning, those dozen guys had completed a 60-page book.
The first generation of comic book creators were incredibly hardworking men. They had all grown up in lower working class environments, practically without exception. The Great Depression had an awful lot to do with the fertility of comics in all of those years. These guys were willing to work incredibly hard to make the stuff real.
One of the hard-working guys at Timely was a distant relative of the publisher, named Stanley Martin Lieber. Lieber would later be known by his pen name, Stan Lee. Often called the father of modern comics, Lee started at Timely in 1939 as a teenaged assistant. Even then, Lee thought comic book superheroes should appeal to an older audience. Publisher Martin Goodman thought that was crazy.
I used to argue with him because I wanted to write things that were a little more adult for more intelligent readers. And he used to say to me, Stan, we have nobody but very young kids reading our books and a few illiterate adults.
Lee's boss wasn't alone in his opinion. Although newspaper strips were read by everybody, comic book publishers knew that their magazines were read almost exclusively by children.
Kids began reading comics as soon as they could read. It was the first purchase you made yourself, except for maybe a pack of gum or penny candy.
So instead of getting more mature, superheroes began changing to better reflect the juvenile market. To make Batman more appealing to kids, his creators transformed him from a weird avenger of evil into a father figure. They invented Dick Grayson, a young acrobat who, like Batman, sees his parents murdered. Batman takes the boy under his wing, and comics' first kid sidekick, Robin the Boy Wonder, is born. The theory was that young readers would identify with young heroes. And in fact, Batman's sales doubled after the introduction of Robin. Soon, there was an avalanche of sidekicks: the Human Torch and Toro, the Sandman and Sandy, Green Arrow and Speedy, Catman and Kitten, the Black Terror and Tim.
This idea of kid sidekicks, I hated it. The court would go after the guy for imperiling the safety of a minor, if nothing else.
While some readers did identify with the kid sidekicks, everybody identified with the superhero who was a kid in real life. Fawcett Publications' Captain Marvel. Created in 1940 by writer Bill Parker and artist C.C. Beck, Captain Marvel is actually a young boy named Billy Batson.
When he says that one magic word, Shazam, he becomes this big, beefy, strapping superhero. That's kind of the ultimate wish fulfillment aspect of the superhero. And I don't think it was ever expressed more purely than in that form.
Pure or not, Superman's publisher, DC Comics, felt that Captain Marvel's form, a black-haired flying strong man with a cape, was a little too close to their man. They sued.
DC just felt threatened by Fawcett because Captain Marvel for a while was outselling Superman, and they kept at that lawsuit.
The legal battle lasted 12 years, until 1953, when Fawcett finally agreed to stop publishing Captain Marvel. Readers at the time weren't aware of the battle between Superman and Captain Marvel. To kids, there was room enough on the newsstands for both, and more. Superhero fantasies were a new way for readers to deal with the realities of the Depression. Now, an even bigger challenge would be just over the horizon. The superheroes would be going to war.
We were fighting Hitler before our government was fighting Hitler.
In 1939, the war in Europe had begun. Even though America wasn't involved yet, many superheroes were. By the end of the year, the Submariner began turning his general hatred of humanity against the Nazis in particular.
We just could all see what a menace Hitler was. It was more than what he was doing to the Jews. It was what he was doing to the whole world. He was gobbling up countries.
Superman's creators Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster thought the Man of Steel could stop the war in 2 pages. In a special story for Look magazine in February 1940, Superman simply grabs Hitler and his then ally Stalin and drops them off at the League of Nations. End of story, end of war.
In American society, we believe in instant solutions. Superheroes do that.
Superman's paper victory made its way to Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, who reportedly called Superman a Jew. The official SS newspaper mocked Siegel as physically and intellectually circumcised. Well before the U.S. entered the war, superheroes weren't just waving the flag, they were wearing it. Timely Comics had the greatest anti-Nazi of them all, who burst on the scene with an unforgettable cover.
Captain America threw a smashing right cross to the jaw of Adolf Hitler. That said everything about the character.
They got hate mail for that. They got hate mail from isolationists.
But most superhero fans didn't care.
Captain America exploded on the newsstand and sold out of his first issue.
The story begins as war is looming. FDR approves a secret project to create an army of super soldiers. Frail Steve Rogers is the first volunteer. The brilliant Professor Einstein injects him with a strange liquid. In seconds, Rogers is a perfect physical specimen, dubbed Captain America. When a Nazi spy kills the professor, the secret of the formula dies with him. So Captain America carries on alone, except for Army mascot turned kid sidekick, Bucky Barnes. Captain America was created by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, who guided him through his first 10 issues.
Joe was a writer. Jack was always at that board, mumbling to himself, smoking a cigar, and drawing.
Jack Kirby, born Jacob Kurtzberg, would become one of the legends of the industry.
He was the Shakespeare or Cervantes, or take your pick, of comic books. He introduced a whole new level of motion into comic books, and that was revolutionary for the time. The page couldn't contain the degree of action.
Simon and Kirby occasionally mixed action with political prophecy. In the spring of 1941, Cap and Bucky stop an unnamed Asian power from destroying the U.S. Pacific Fleet, 7 months before Pearl Harbor was attacked. When the Japanese actually did cripple that same fleet, Captain America's wrath echoed the nations. With war declared, the men in tights cast all restraint to the winds.
The superheroes went off to war with great gusto. Week after week, month after month, just pounding the hell out of the Nazis.
The stories had so much pro-American propaganda that you'd almost think they were subsidized by the government, but it was just, we felt we had to do that.
And then something very interesting happened, which was that comic books were included in care packages that were sent to soldiers, along with chocolate and cigarettes, and comic books became part of the standard reading material for GIs serving in the Second World War, and they liked them.
The superheroes were now in sync with the government's war effort, and comic book sales soared from 15 million a month in 1942 to 25 million a month a year later. World War II was the peak of what would be called the golden age of comics. And why not? In the comic book,